بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So alhamdulillah, we're going to be picking up inshallah, continuing our series on the science of Tajweed. And so I wanted to start with the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. وعن أبي موسى الأشعري رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. So Abu Musa al-Ash'ari radiyallahu anhu, this is each week we start with a virtue of the Quran so that it entices us and we understand the reward. He says that the Prophet, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says that مثل المؤمن الذي يقرأ القرآن مثل الأترجة ريحها طيب وطعمها طيب. So the example of the believer, the one who recites the Quran, the example of the believer who recites the Quran is like a citrus fruit. Its smell and its taste is sweet, or it's good. So a citrus fruit has not just a good smell and not just good taste, but it has both. And he says that وَمَثَلُ الْمُؤْمِنِ الَّذِي لَا يَقْرَأُ الْقُرْآنِ مَثَلُ التَّمْرَةِ. And the example of the believer who doesn't recite the Quran is like that of a date. And it's interesting because لا ريح لها وطعمها حلو. So dates don't have any smell, but they still taste good. So it's saying that the Prophet ﷺ is saying that the person, the believer who doesn't recite Quran, internally and inherently that person is still good. That person still has good within them, but it's just not expressed to others. Because if they were reciting Quran, they would be like the citrus fruit, which not only tastes good, but it also smells good. It emanates and it gives off good scent to its society. And so that's the example of the person who recites Quran. Interestingly, he says, وَمَثَلُ الْمُنَافِقِ الَّذِي يَقْرَأُ الْقُرْآنِ مَثَلُ الرَّيْحَانَ رِيحُهَا طِيبٌ وَطَعْمُهَا مُرٌّ. And the example of the hypocrite who recites the Quran. So this is interesting because most Muslims, most believers don't recite Quran, but here, even the munafiqeen, even the hypocrites, they would recite Quran. Because that's so prevalent. Hypocrites have to fit in. So they need to recite Quran because that's what believers do. That's what everybody used to do. So that person is like, rayhana, they say, is like basil. And rihuha, so it has a good smell, but a bad taste. So the munafiq, apparently to the people, the hypocrite seems like a good person, but internally, that person is bitter. That example is like that person is bitter. وَمَثَلُ الْمُنَافِقِ, and the example of the hypocrite الَّذِي لَا يَقْرَأُ الْقُرْآنَ كَمَثَلِ الْحَنْظَلَةِ لَيْسَ لَهَا رِيحٌ وَطَعْمُهَا مُرٌّ. The example of the hypocrite who doesn't recite the Quran is like a hanzala, which they said is like a small seed. And لَيْسَ لَهَا رِيحٌ, it doesn't have any smell, and its taste is bitter. So of course we want to be in the category of the believer who recites the Quran. And so that's one of the goals of this class, is that it teaches us the rules of the Quran and also creates within us that desire to recite the Quran. So that's inshallah the hadith that we'll start with today. So we covered, over the last few weeks, we covered, if you look at the notes, anyone? So we covered, we started with the Makhaarij al-Huruf, we started with the articulation points, and we've covered the Makhaarij of the Jawf, the cavity, the throat, and some of the tongue. And then we said that if you look at the first page, there's different categories or different topics that we'll study in this class. One is the Makhaarij and the Sifat, the articulation points of the letters and the qualities. One is the Ahkam, the rules, and one is where we'll start and stop. So we've been kind of picking and choosing to try to make it, because everything kind of relies on, builds upon each other. So we've been taking a little bit each week. So we've covered in Makhaarij I mentioned, and in Ahkam, we've gone through the rules of Nun Sakin of Idhar and Idgham and Iqlab. Right? So we covered 3 out of the rules of Noon Sakin and Tanween. So I want to first start with some questions that were left over from last week. And so last week, there were two questions that I didn't answer. So the first of them was about qalqala. Right? There was a question last week about qalqala. So qalqala, for review's sake, what is qalqala? Yeah. So if you look at the slide that says qualities of letters, there are those that have opposites, and there are those that are just on their own. It's towards the end of the packet. So it's the second page of those. So now we said qalqala actually is the bouncing sound that we make on when certain letters have a sukoon on them. So what are those letters? Qutb, right? It's on the sheet. So qaf, ta, ba, jim, and dal. Okay, so the letters are qutb. And so within the qalqala, there's three types. There's qalqala kubra, wusta, and sughra. And so the big qalqala, the major, the biggest one, is whenever we have a letter of qalqala with a shadda on it. So it's going to become, for example, we have the word So in Surah An-Naba we say ذَلِكَ الْيَوْمُ الْحَقُّ. And so this is going to be the strongest qalqala. It's stopping, so it's at the end of an ayah, and it has a shadda. And a shadda is a doubled already. So then this qaf is going to be an example of one that is the strongest qalqala. So everybody say al-Halq.
Al-Halq.
Good. Similarly, if we were to stop on the word we would say al-Hajj. We'd say al-Hajj. So everybody say it?
Al-Hajj.
Okay. So this is good because we're going to do the Makhaarij of Jim today to see where exactly that sound comes from. So that's the first thing. In the middle is when the middle level of qalqala is when it comes in the middle of a word. Right? So when the letter of qalqala comes in the middle of a word. So for example, we say okay. So how would we say this? Right. Okay. So this dal is a letter of qalqala. First we recognize that it's a letter of qalqala. It's qaf, ta, ba, jim, dal. So when we see it with the sukoon, we're going to bounce. We're going to make it bounce. Now the question is how strong, right? So this is going to be the middle level of. I'm sorry. This is actually the third level. This is the third level. This is the third level. This is going to be the lowest level. So the first one is when it's at the end of an ayah and it's a shadda. Okay? And so the middle, the lowest one is going to be when it's in the middle of a word. So here we wouldn't say udkhuluha. We'd say udkhuluha, udkhuluha, udkhuluha. Similarly, we say we'd say wijha.
Wijha.
Yeah, so when the letter is in the middle, we wouldn't say wijha and make it disproportional. So this would be the example of the qalqala sughra. And then the last one, which is the middle one, is when it's a sukoon at the end of an ayah. It's a sukoon at the end. So we want to say, for example,
lahab.
Yeah. Yeah. so since we're stopping, we're going to put the sukoon on the dal. So it'd be al-Majid.
Al-Majid.
And so this is going to be thin, right? So how do we say it correctly? How do we make something thin? Smile. So al-Majid.
Al-Majid.
Yeah. So we wouldn't say al-Majid, right? That's just, there's no shadda, and it's not that level of qalqala. But it's also not the lowest one, which it would be like al-Majid, right? This is kind of the middle level of qalqala. So that was the first question. The second question was about the difference between qalqala and humps on certain letters. And so if you look at the quality of shidda, so this should be on the slide on the page before it. If you look at shidda, what does shidda mean?
Emphasis.
Yeah, or strength.
Strength.
So we said the first one, the first sifa we covered last week, which was humps, right? And what was humps? Whispering. And anyone remember the letters?
Lost what it was.
It's fa, ha, fa, ha, sha, jim, sad, sin.
No, he's supposed to remember the term.
No, we need the demonic. The demonic.
The demonic. So it's فَحَثَّهُ شَخْصٌ سَكَتْ. Right?
That's what I wanted to.
So
You didn't write it like that though. You don't have it here like that.
yeah, فَحَثَّهُ شَخْصٌ سَكَتْ. It's in that order. It's in that order. I haven't written it as a word, but it's in that order.
All right, yeah, I see.
Okay? So فَحَثَّهُ شَخْصٌ سَكَتْ. Now it's just, the point of that is not that you need to know the word, the point is you need to know the letters. So if you figure them out, it's still okay. And so these are letters we said that when we see them, particularly with sukoon, we pronounce them with air coming out, with whispering. So we'd say af-ida, or at, tabbat yada, right? So now the question came was, what about ta and ka when we said, you know, what's the difference between saying tabbat yada and tabbat yada? And why is it qalqala? And so part of that is going to, the relationship between those is in the next quality, which is shidda. So let's look at those letters real quick. The mnemonic for it is ajid qattin bakat. Ajid qattin bakat. Now, where do those letters look familiar from before? Or some of them? Yeah, right? So look, this all makes sense. So these are the letters of shidda, and the letters are okay. So we have ajid qattin bakat. Now out of these, qaf, ta, da, jim, and dal are letters of qalqala. Okay? And two of them here were basically the ones that we were talking about. The ones that we were a little bit confused about. Were the ka and the ta. So we did وَوَضَعْنَا عَنْكَ وِزْرَكَ. Right? Wizrak. So somebody was asking what's the difference between wizrak and with the humps we do there and qalqala. And so they're closely related because these letters we do qalqala on and these letters we do humps on, but they're all letters of strength. And so that's why there's an extra emphasis. You're supposed to be recited completely and with kind of with strength. And so this is where these kind of two things come together. Does that help at all? Some sort of clarification? Or no? Right, so we'll see, we'll practice again. But specifically for the example of the ka and the ta, these are all letters of shidda. And so that's another quality that you will need. وعن أبي موسى الأشعري رضي الله عنه قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. So Abu Musa al-Ash'ari radiallahu anhu, this is each week we start with a virtue of the Quran so that it entices us and we understand the reward. He says that the Prophet, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says that so dates don't have any smell. but they still taste good. So it's saying that the Prophet ﷺ is saying that the person, the believer who doesn't recite Quran, internally and inherently that person is still good. That person still has good within them, but it's just not expressed to others. Because if they were reciting Quran, they would be like the citrus fruit, which not only... So a citrus fruit has not just a good smell and not just good taste, but it has both. And he says that وَمَثَلُ الْمُؤْمِنِ الَّذِي لَا يَقْرَأُ الْقُرْآنِ مَثَلُ التَّمْرَةِ. And the example of the believer who doesn't recite the Quran is like that of a date. And it's interesting because لا ريح لها وطعمها حلو. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So alhamdulillah, we're going to be picking up inshallah, continuing our series on the science of Tajweed. And so I wanted to start with the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. الذي يقرأ القرآن مثل الأترجة ريحها طيب وطعمها طيب. So the example of the believer, the one who recites the Quran, the example of the believer who recites the Quran is like a citrus fruit. Its smell and its taste is sweet, or it's good.